Live. We're live. So good morning, everyone, and good late evening to Charlotte. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. For those joining us for the first time, we are all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And we are so excited because this session kicks off our entire new year of 2020, an entire new decade, and our biggest year yet coming, starting with this incredible slew of people all through January. So this session is exceptional for a couple of reasons. I'm going to introduce our speaker in a minute with some of those reasons, but first I want to take it to our classes. We have 5 classes right now joining us from across North America. 2 more should be joining soon. So let's give them a chance to say a little hello. We've got Mr. LeVogue's grade 3s in North Palm Beach in Florida. Hi, guys.
Say hi.
Hey. Nice to see ya. We've got Miss Provencher's grade 6s in Longueuil in Quebec. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hey, welcome in. We've got Miss Munier's grade 6s in Festus in Missouri. Let me get your mic. Awesome. Hi, guys. Hey. Awesome. We've got Miss Anderson's grade 5s in Taylorville in Illinois. Guys. Hi, just pouring in, awesome. And last but not least, we've got Miss Sullivan's grade 3s in Vestavia Hills in Alabama. Let's get you guys. Hey, everyone. There's so many of you. Welcome in. Awesome. All right. Of course, the reason you guys are all here is for our speaker. So we are joined live in Beijing in China at 10 p.m. by Charlotte Hacker. So Charlotte is, okay, I wanted to introduce, today is like a trifecta of amazing educational organizations. So I had already highlighted Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants is presenting this. We're also partnering with Reach the World. So we've done many sessions with Reach the World. They bring long form stories of amazing research expeditions and science stories all around the globe. We've done a couple of them just before in December. We're doing another one on Wednesday. We're really excited to have them back. They do fantastic work, and we'll share more about Charlotte's expedition when we're done. This session is also really exciting because this is the first time ever we are bringing in a Fulbright U.S. student program researcher in Charlotte Hacker. So we're so excited to highlight the Fulbright organization, another fantastic educational group. And so for the 3 of us, we welcome all the classes in today. And without further ado, Charlotte, take us away on your research on snow leopards in the Himalaya in the remote field sites in China that you get to work on. It is so very cool, but I don't want to steal your thunder. So take it away.
All right. Thank you for the introduction, Jesse. That was great. So like Jesse said, my name is Charlotte and I'm a scientist, and I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about what it's like to be a scientist, what it's like to live in China, and specifically what it's like to study snow leopards. I think I have one of the coolest jobs ever, and I'm really excited to tell you guys about it, and specifically why snow leopards are important and why we should conserve them. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just showing you where exactly in the world I am. So let's see here. Let me make sure I do this right. All right. Can everybody see a map on the screen?
We can. You're all set.
Right? Everything's good?
Yep, you're perfect.
Perfect. All right. So just to give you guys an idea of where I'm at, over here on the left-hand side, we have the United States, Canada. I'm actually from a little state on the East Coast called Delaware originally. And I grew up always really liking being outside, and I really loved animals, but I always thought that if I wanted to work with animals, that I had to be a vet or a wildlife rehabber or something like that. It wasn't until I was in college that I learned about conservation biology and conservation science, and that I could actually do research to save at-risk species. So species that aren't really doing well in the wild that need a little bit of extra help. And that led me to my job now, where I study snow leopards in China. And I'm specifically based in Beijing. So where that red star is, that's the city I live in China. It's the capital of China. It's a huge city. There's about 25 million people that live here. So it's a lot of people in a small space, but it's also a very old city. So there's a lot of really cool things to do and some really interesting history. And then about once every 2 months, I, along with my research institute and the people I work with, we go out to the Tibetan Plateau in Western China.
Oh, Charlotte, your audio cut out for a second. Let's see if we can get you back. Oh, there.
Are you there?
Hey, the briefest of interruptions. You're back though.
All right, I'm gonna try it again. Sorry guys, my internet is not great.
Keeps it exciting.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, so now I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about snow leopards and what I do, but a lot of my work is on the western end of China on the Tibetan Plateau. And you guys have probably seen snow leopards before. You might know what one looks like. So they're big cats. They're closely related actually to tigers. A lot of people think they're more closely related to common leopards, but snow leopards are actually their own species and they're more related to tigers than other big cat species. And so snow leopards have really, really cool, unique features that allow them to live at high altitudes in mountainous environments. And so they have this really thick and dense fur that keeps them warm in the cold. They have a really long, bushy tail that allows them to steer through the mountains as they're climbing through. And they have these really huge feet that kind of act as snowshoes for them to move through their environment on the snow. And snow leopards are really, really important because they're apex predators. So this means that they're at the top of the food chain. And so they control basically the populations below them. So other species that they eat are kind of kept in balance in the ecosystem. So without snow leopards, without predators in the ecosystem, things can go out of whack really quickly, which isn't good for the environment. Despite us being able to recognize snow leopards, we've all probably seen one, maybe you've seen one at a zoo. There's still a lot that we don't know about them. Specifically, we don't know how many are left in the wild. We're not even sure the distribution exactly, so where are snow leopards even found? We don't know exactly what they eat, and we also aren't too sure about other different parameters or things that are important for their survival. And so one of the things that we are doing is trying to study them to learn more about them so that we can conserve them. But this is hard because snow leopards live in really remote environments where humans can't thrive, right? So it's really difficult at high altitudes because there's not a lot of oxygen. And so it's really hard as a researcher to be in there to get into snow leopard habitat. It's also really cold and it's a really hard habitat to climb through and traverse. On top of that, snow leopards are very, very well camouflaged with their environment. So I always joke that a snow leopard has probably seen me a dozen times, but I've actually never seen a snow leopard in the wild, even though I could have been looking right at one, because they're so well blended. So in this picture, it's hard to tell because the snow leopard is on snow. It's kind of out in the open. But typically when we see snow leopards, they're going to be alongside the mountains and the rock sides. And so I want you to pretend right now that you are a snow leopard researcher and you are looking for a snow leopard. There's a snow leopard in this picture. You can see at the bottom there, these are blue sheep. That's like a snow leopard's favorite food. And I want you to try to find the snow leopard. It's kind of like a Where's Waldo? I promise you there's one in there. So I'll give you, I don't know, like 10 seconds. Remember, they're really well blended with their environment. They can be really difficult to spot. And if you look really closely, you'll see that the snow leopard is right there. So where I circled it, it's a little bit hard to see because the picture is a little bit pixelated, blown up, but you can see that there is actually 2 eyes and a face sticking out from the rocks there inside of that white circle. Even their own food item, these blue sheep here, they don't even know that they're about to get eaten. That's how well blended snow leopards are. And they're also very quiet. We often think of big cats as growling or roaring like a tiger or a lion, but actually snow leopards kind of have a really puny yowling, meowing sound that they make, and really quiet. All right, well, one more. I'll give you one chance to find the snow leopard. This one I think is a lot easier, but it's still pretty tough. So pretend you're the researcher and you're trying to look for a snow leopard in the wild. And it's right in front of you and you know it's right in front of you. I'll give you 5 more seconds. All right, so there's the snow leopard. So in the circle again, and then if you look off to the left hand side there, you can see this kind of peeking out there with 2 eyes, right? The snow leopards are really hard to see and they're really difficult to study. And that kind of leaves us with limited options on how to study them. But we have some ways to get around this. So instead of actually seeing a snow leopard in person, we can use a couple tools to study them non-invasively, which means we can be kind of out of their environment and just collect the things that snow leopards leave behind or pictures that we may capture of them. One of the ways we do is through camera tracking. So this right here attached to the rock is called a camera trap. So think of it as a fancy digital camera that's really, really sturdy. It can hold up against the elements, right? And what happens is we put it up and we put it in an area where we think we might be able to find a snow leopard. And then we have a motion sensor on the camera trap that when an animal walks past it will be triggered to take a picture. And so when the camera trap takes a picture, we can then take that picture and look at it later off of the SD card in the camera. And sometimes we can get some really, really great photos. So for example, this is a photo of a snow leopard that we got from a camera trap. And so with this particular, are you guys still there? Nobody's moving.
Oh no, we're there. We're good. Yep, there's a little delay, but we're good, Charlotte.
Okay, we're good. Okay, sorry. Everyone is frozen on my side. Okay. So what we can do is we can get pictures of snow leopards and we can tell things like how many different individuals are in an area because they have these unique different spots. So we can tell them apart. And we can also get an idea of, are there cubs present? So are there baby snow leopards present? Maybe we get a picture of them. Or we can look at other behavior aspects to learn more about snow leopards. So another thing that is really cool with camera trapping is that we can find out new information about snow leopards. So for example, we used to think that snow leopards were solitary, meaning that they hang out by themselves. They don't really have best friends other than coming together to breed or kind of accidentally running into each other's territories. They don't really interact much with each other. But now through some of our camera trapping work, we're learning that snow leopards actually hang out in groups quite a bit, or at least more than we thought they did. So for example, in this picture, there's 3 snow leopards here. They might all be related. It might be a mom with some older cubs or something like that. And then if you look in this picture, there's actually 4 snow leopards. So 1, 2, 3, and then there's some beady eyes down there in the corner. And so we can learn new things about their behavior as well using camera trapping. Is really cool because it gives us more information and helps us identify areas where snow leopards may or may not be present and how we can help protect them in those areas. But one of the last ways that we can actually study snow leopards is by finding what they leave behind. So finding an actual snow leopard is difficult, but finding their poop is not nearly as difficult. So one of the things we do is we walk around and we pick up poo. So the polite term for it is called scat. That's actually poop from cat species. And so what we can get from this is actually a lot of information because in each scat sample that we pick up is something called DNA. So each of you're made up of trillions and trillions of cells. All living life is made up of these cells that you can't see unless you look under a microscope. And in each of these cells is something called DNA. And DNA is basically the code that makes you, you. So inside each of your cells is this information that basically dictates what color your hair is, how tall you are, different personality traits, the tastes you do and don't like when you eat, all sorts of things. Everything is coded by this DNA. And it's unique to only you. No one has it. But you get DNA from your parents. Whoever you're related to, your DNA is more similar to them than to say a friend that lives down the street that you're not related to. We can get this information, this DNA from snow leopard through their scat. And so what we do is we pick up the scat and we put it in a tube and we take it back to the lab. And then we actually extract the DNA out of each and every single one of those cells. And we do a series of different laboratory techniques to actually read the DNA. So just like you would read a book, we read the DNA and we look at that unique structure and unique composition of the DNA to actually tell individuals apart from one another and to tell who's related to who. So if I pick up 10 different scat samples and I look at the DNA, maybe 2 of them have the same DNA and 3 of them have the same DNA and the rest all have different DNA, then I would know that there's 8 different individuals living in that area. Similarly, I can see how related they are. So I can see if there's any siblings present. I can see if there's maybe a mom and cubs present. And I can also look at their genetic diversity, which is really important in breeding efforts to make sure we have a good, healthy population of snow leopards living in the area. And what else is really cool is that we can also look at the DNA of what the snow leopard ate. So just like the DNA of the actual snow leopard is going to be in that scat sample, so is the DNA of the goat or the sheep species or whatever else they ate. And so one of the main things we're trying to figure out is how can we use this technique to see what snow leopard are eating. So can we look at the DNA of, say, a blue sheep like you saw in that first picture to be able to tell what the snow leopard ate by just looking at its scat. And this is important because being able to understand what snow leopards are eating really helps us look at the entire ecosystem to see how healthy it is. So if snow leopards are eating a lot of blue sheep, then we know that there's a good population of prey, of food for snow leopards to eat. If snow leopards are eating food that they don't typically like, or maybe they're eating herders' livestock. So in a lot of snow leopard habitat, herders live and have goats and sheep and yak. If we find that kind of animal in snow leopard scat, and then we know that the snow leopard ate that, then that might tell us that they're having trouble finding food and that this might be an area where we need to focus more on conservation efforts for the prey items as well. So there's a lot we can learn from poop, and there's a lot that we can learn from camera mapping, and those are ways that we can study snow leopards without actually having to bother them or touch them. It's really helpful because snow leopards are so difficult to study and there's still so much that we don't know about them. And so I'm really excited to answer any questions you guys might have. It's totally up to you what you want to ask. I'm an open book. Feel free, snow leopards are living in China or anything else you might be curious about.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for that, Charlotte. If you want to come out of screen share too, so we can see you again, that would be great. Before we dive into
Q&A,
yeah, you're good. We'd highlighted at the beginning that you split time between Beijing and this remote field site. Can you explain to classes a little bit about what it takes to get to that field site from where you are now?
Yes, so we have to first fly somewhere in an airplane. So typically we fly, there's a major city out on the Tibetan Plateau called Xining, and it's kind of like the major city where we can drive from to our field sites. And that takes anywhere, depending on where our field site is, anywhere from 7 hours to close to 16 hours. So it's a lot to actually get out to snow leopard habitat, and then it's even more driving once we're done flying.
Very cool. All right. Well, with that, I want to dive in with Q&A. I want to make a couple notes. We've got Miss Deer's class that joined us from Chesapeake and Virginia, so welcome into you guys, our grade 7 classes. And then I also wanted to mention we have 10 classes watching on YouTube right now. So if any of the classes on YouTube want to let us know where they're joining from and what grade they're in, yeah, type in questions and we'll happily pass along as many as I can. But yeah, let's kick it off with one from Mr. Lavogue's class. If you want to kick us off, come on up.
Wonderful. You want to stand up and say who you are and then ask your question? Go ahead.
My name's Paxton, and how many feet up do the snow leopards live?
How many feet up do the snow leopards live?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. So it depends. It's really wide ranging, depending on where we're actually looking at. So typically our field sites are about 13,000 feet high, but we've sampled anywhere up to close to 15,000 feet. So it just kind of depends on which area we're in, but usually about 13,000 feet.
And is this hard to breathe when you're that high, Charlotte? A quick follow-up.
Yes.
The short answer.
Yeah, so actually one of the things we have to do is budget a couple of days to get used to the altitude. Because if your body isn't used to it, it kind of panics a little bit. There's not enough oxygen in the air, and so we all get really sick the first couple of days, and then your body gets used to it, and then we're fine.
Very cool. All right. Ms. Provencher's class, if you guys have a question, go for it.
你好吗？
Ni hao. How?
Our question is, what are the conditions when you work in the Himalayas?
What are the conditions like? It depends on the time of the year. So in the summer, it's actually really comfortable. It's like 65 degrees is the high. It still gets kind of cold at night, but it's really, really nice and pleasant. In the winter, it's absolutely frigid. It's super cold and it's really, really windy, which I think is the hardest part because even though the temperature might get above freezing, you still have really harsh, strong winds coming at you. It still feels really, really cold. So winter is tough. Summer is relatively easy.
Cool, awesome. And I love the Chinese introduction, by the way. Thank you so
Yes.
much for doing that. That was awesome. All right, we only get this with Reach the World sessions. I don't know why this is, but it's awesome. We appreciate it. Anyway, all right, Miss Deer's class, as I said, you guys joined in about halfway through. So if you have a question, come on up.
Hey there. Whoops, wait.
You're good.
Hi. Hey, we're a little bashful this morning, so I'm going to ask on behalf of the class. How is a snow leopard well adapted for mountain life since it's so difficult for you as humans?
Yeah. So one of the things that snow leopards are really, really good at is walking on snow. And that's because they have these huge feet, right? So they kind of have these built-in snow shoes. They also have really thick, dense fur. So they have like a built-in parka all the time so they can stay warm. And they have these really long tails that are really bushy. And we think that they're used to help them steer while they're chasing down prey in the mountains. But sometimes they'll also seem to use it as an insulator or a blanket. So they kind of have like a built-in blanket with their tail. And then we're also learning now that they are specifically adapted to living with low oxygen. So their bodies are built a little bit different than ours. And the way that they transport oxygen through their bloodstream is probably a little bit different. And that helps them live at high altitudes too.
Excellent. Thank you, Charlotte. All right, I want to take a quick YouTube question. Sonabelle, grade 2 student in Miss Trombley's class in Kapuskasing, Ontario, wanted to ask, how long do snow leopards live?
We don't know that. Isn't that crazy? I know. So in the wild, we're not very sure. In zoos, they've lived for upwards of 22 to 25 years. That is the absolute oldest. But we think in the wild, they probably live a little bit shorter lifespans, just because in the wild it's a little bit rougher. But we are not actually sure. When we actually find a snow leopard in the wild and age it, it's all relative to any of the other snow leopards we found. So sometimes you can tell that their teeth are worn down, or maybe they've gotten into a fight and they have some battle scars. It might be an older individual, but otherwise we're not so sure. The best guess is about 13 to 15 years.
Okay, very cool. Let's go to Festus, Missouri, Miss Munier's class. Come on up, guys.
Got a question. Megan, go ahead, babe. The camera's right here. You're going to want to walk up to where they can see you. Lean down a little bit. There you go. Quiet, guys. Nice and loud.
Have you caught any mothers with cubs on the trap cam before?
Yeah, we actually have. Only once. And I'm pretty sure that it was at one of our field sites where, let's see here. So one of our field sites, there's a ton of snow leopards there. It's a snow leopard hotspot. So it means that there's a lot of individuals in the area. And so we always get really lucky with the photos we get there. And there was one time where we got a mother with super young cubs. They were very, very young, maybe 2 to 3 months old. So that was really cool to see. But otherwise, usually we're just getting single snow leopards on one camera.
Outstanding, very cool. I'm glad babies got brought up. It's been brought up by a couple of YouTube classes too, so we've covered babies.
Yeah.
Miss Anderson's class, if you guys want to have a question, go for it.
Good luck to the 5th grade volleyball team.
Is there another class you could go to real quick? We're finishing up our announcements and we
Oh, no
can't hear
worries.
you real great.
Yeah, that's okay. Perfect. Okay, let's go to Miss Sullivan's group, and then we'll come back in a second.
All right, Raddy, you want to ask a question? Be really loud.
How big are snow leopards' feet?
How big are their
How
feet?
big are their feet?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. Let me think here. So we actually don't know how big snow leopards get as adults in the wild. We only have an idea of the ones that we've actually caught. So typically they're about 70 pounds. The biggest one ever recorded, I think, was 105 pounds. And so their feet, ooh, man, that's a really good question. I'm not 100% sure.
But
I would say if you are an adult and you put your full hand out, but picture it being really furry and having like completely covered and having claws. I think that's probably about the size of a snow leopard foot.
okay. See, I love this, and a few of your questions have touched upon the fact that this is such a rare and elusive animal that even though it's a large predatory cat, we know so
Yeah.
little about it, which is so cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, Miss Anderson's class, if your announcements are done, if they're not, we'll come back in a second, but let's see. Miss
We're ready. We're
Anderson,
ready.
you're ready. Perfect.
Get down.
Do all snow leopards live in one spot? But if not, where do they go?
Yeah.
Is the real question.
That is a really good question. So snow leopards are actually found in 12 different countries throughout Asia. So in China, we think that there's the most snow leopards there because it has the most snow leopard habitat, but they're also found in other countries like India, Nepal, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Mongolia, Russia. So there's a lot of other places where you can find snow leopards. And we're not really sure how far they travel or how big their home ranges are as individuals. It probably depends on the location and how difficult it is to move through the mountains. Pretty sure that their home ranges are pretty large, and probably males are going to have bigger home ranges than females, but we're still not quite sure how big of an area that actually is.
Okay, I'm glad you answered both possible interpretations of that question. Very cool. All right, I love this question. We got it from Miss Place's class, Coral Reef Elementary School, Miami, Florida, who, by the way, found both leopards, they say, in your game. So I don't know,
Right.
there's no way to confirm, but I believe them. But the question was, the question was, can you tell us how you became a scientist and what your area of study was?
Sure. So I actually started in college as a pre-veterinary major. Like I said, growing up, I thought that I had to be a vet to work with animals. I didn't really know what the other options were. And so I started out wanting to be a vet, and then realizing that I didn't really like it that much. I had a really hard time with my classes. And so I ended up switching to a biology major just to kind of keep my options open. And then I actually ended up studying abroad. I went to Africa and was there for a bit and met other conservation biologists working in Zimbabwe. And I realized that that was the path that I wanted to take, that I wanted to become a conservation scientist. And so I basically pursued that the best that I could. I finished my undergrad degree, and then I went on to graduate school to get my master's. So I went to do more school. And there I studied elephants. So before snow leopards, I actually started doing elephants. And I worked in a lot of zoos, which was like a huge part of me learning about conservation science. And then I decided I wanted to go back to school again to start my PhD, and got involved with the snow leopard work. And so it was a series of a lot of different events and a lot of schooling and kind of figuring out exactly where I fit in.
Very fantastic answer. There's a quick follow-up question from Miss Aldrich's group, grade 6s in Morrison, Illinois. And they wanted to ask, so you mentioned school 3 separate times. How many years of school is this? So try and figure it out. And for kids who are either excited by this or very disappointed, there's a lot left. So undergrad, 4 years.
Oh, no, so I'm on grade 23.
Okay. So for the grade 3 students, there's only 20 years more. That's it. It'd be fantastic to get the snow leopard work. Very cool. All right. Let's do another round of questions with live classes. Take a few more from YouTube, and that'll be great. All right, Mr. LeVogue's class, if you guys want to come back up, go for it.
Oh, yes, sir. Jesse, after we ask this question and listen to the answer, we're going to have to get going. So I just wanted to give you a heads up.
Perfect.
You want to stand up and ask your question? Tell her who you are.
My name's Layla, and I want to ask, how are snow leopards endangered?
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good question, Layla. So there's lots of reasons why snow leopards are endangered. They're actually doing better, we think, that their populations are increasing. But one of the big reasons is that their habitat is disappearing really quickly. And so they live in very fragile landscapes, these high mountainous regions. And so once their habitat disappears and snow leopards have nowhere to live, then they can't survive. There's also a lot of problems with snow leopard poaching. So when people kill snow leopards, and sometimes that happens because, like I said earlier, with their diet, what snow leopards are eating, sometimes snow leopards can't find food. They have a hard time. And so what they'll do is they'll end up going to somebody's farm or where they're keeping their goats and their sheep, and they'll eat one of the herders or the farmer's animals. And then the herder gets upset, understandably, because there's an animal that's just kind of broken and eaten his sheep. And so sometimes they kill the snow leopards to avoid that from happening again, which is a pretty big problem. And then there's also things like anthropogenic or people, those kinds of disturbances, right? As we kind of start to populate all corners of the earth and we're building roads, we're building railways, we're building homes. And so now people are kind of moving into snow leopard habitat and there's nowhere for snow leopards to go. And so then they also can't survive there either. So the big ones are things like climate change, which is making their habitat get warmer or more unpredictable. And then also poaching or being killed because of human wildlife conflict. And then also just humans in general, we're just kind of everywhere. And so we're disrupting their habitat and making it harder for them to survive.
It's remarkable how many different conservation groups and individuals we work with where these are the answers. It's our impact.
Yeah.
There's lots of ways that we can help. The benefit of this is that there are lots of ways that we can help to make things better. But great question. I'm really glad we got it. And thank you so much for Mr. Laveau's class for joining us. I know you guys have to go, but we really appreciate the questions, guys. All right. Miss Pro-Ange's class, if you guys have a second question, go for it.
Is it true that snow leopards use their tails as a scarf?
Yeah, so we think that it's kind of like a built-in blanket. So sometimes you'll see pictures of them where they're all kind of wrapped up and their tails whip around. And so we're thinking it's some sort of insulator to help keep them warm. A scarf is actually a really good way to put it. I like that, a built-in scarf. That's good.
That is the first scarf tail animal question we've ever got in the history of exploring.
I like it.
So thank you for that. That's awesome. All right, Miss Deer's class, if you guys in your awesome Adirondack chairs are a little more forthcoming, come on up. And if not, Miss Deer herself.
Yeah. Come on, speed it quick.
No, I
Okay.
want to see me.
All right.
I feel sorry. All
All right, we're still.
Is there a common illness that snow leopards can inherit?
Yeah.
That's a question. So one of the things that we're starting to look at is disease transmission in snow leopards. That's something that's really understudied. Not many scientists are working on it, but it is something that we're starting to look at. But we're not really so sure in the wild what diseases they suffer from. In zoos, there's often issues with their eyes. So they're born with retinal deformities and have trouble seeing. And then there's also issues with their liver and kidney, also common in zoos. And so whether that's just something specific to snow leopard or some type of genetic disease that's gotten into the population of snow leopards in zoos, we're not really sure. But what they actually suffer from in the wild, we really don't know much about yet.
Okay, great question though. All right, Miss Hearn Smith's class, joining us 3-4s in Stratford, Ontario. They wanted to know, these are questions that you might not know about, so I'll pass along both. How long do babies stay with their parents? And then completely unrelated, why do they only live in groups sometimes? If we know the answer to those.
Okay, so babies usually stay with their parents a couple of years at most. Breeding age is anywhere between 3 to 5 years old. So usually once snow leopard cubs are 3, their mom is ready for them to get out and they're ready to get out. They want to kind of explore on their own and do their own thing. So we're not really sure exactly when that happens. And there's probably other factors that go into it. But usually 2 years max is how long a cub is going to be. Basically until that animal learns how to hunt and feed itself, it's going to be with mom until then. And that takes a couple years or so. And then why are they only in groups sometimes? So we think that it's probably more likely that they're going to be in groups when it's breeding time. So when it's time to find a mate, they're going to run into each other more often because they're communicating more often and figuring out who's who and who's in the area and where the closest mate might potentially be. And so they're more likely to come in contact with each other during the season where they're going to be breeding. Then there's also, like I said, these snow leopard hotspots where there might just be specific populations of snow leopards where they hang out a lot together because the density of them is higher. So there's just more of them in an area and they can maybe just tolerate each other more, that they're okay with that overlap. So maybe you have an older brother that drives you crazy, but you kind of put up with them because you live in the same house and you have to kind of thing, rather than being able to kind of go to your own spot and get away from your brother for a little bit.
I'm sensing there's a backstory here.
I had one.
All right, one more question from YouTube before we wrap up with a few more from live classes. So Ms. Valdez's class, Coral Reef Elementary, they saw a lot of pictures of snow leopards at night. Are they nocturnal?
Okay, so other really good question. And I get really excited about this one because on the camera traps, we see differing kind of times that they're active versus not. We always thought in the past that they were something called crepuscular, which means they're active in the morning and then in the evening. And we thought that this was the case because that's when their food items are active. So the things that they like to eat, they're most active at morning and in the evening. So it makes sense that a snow leopard would want the opportunity to chase down its prey. So they're going to follow the same kind of activity pattern that their food items are. But now we're seeing them kind of more at night. So that one camera trap photo that I showed you guys of them at night, I think that one was from like 2 in the morning, something random. And we weren't expecting to see them then. So we're thinking that they might be a little bit more nocturnal. But then I also have researchers and friends that have been out in the field and seen them at noon, lunchtime. So we're not really sure exactly when they're most active. Probably more so often when their prey are. And if their prey are being disturbed for some reason, whether it be by humans or some other type of influence that's changing the time of day that the prey are active, then the snow leopards are going to follow that as well. So we're just kind of keeping an eye on it and trying to figure it out for now.
They're just messing with us. They know there's so few people.
So.
What they want. All right, let's head back to Festus in Missouri. Ms. Munier's class, come on up, guys.
We're coming.
Take your time.
Are there different kinds of breeds of snow leopards? And if there are, do they have different colors of fur?
Cool.
Oh, that's such a good question. So we're actually thinking that within the snow leopard species itself, that they're actually subspecies. So not necessarily that there's different kinds of snow leopards per se, that within that one specific species of snow leopard, they are different enough that they can be broken into 3 different groups. And these 3 different groups kind of correspond with their geography. So we have snow leopards that are in Mongolia, and they're a lot more genetically different than snow leopards that are in China and the southern part of their range. And those are a lot more genetically different than snow leopards that are in the western part of their range. That's something I'm still looking into. Morphologically, or the way that they look, they don't really look that different. There might be a few differences in coloration or size, but for the most part, snow leopards pretty much look the same. But there are definitely differences in their genetics, so in their DNA. And so that's what we're looking at now to try to figure out how different are they, and does that mean that they're different species?
Very cool. Thanks, Charlotte. All right, last 3 guys. So Miss Anderson's class, come on up.
Are cougars and snow leopards related, and how many species are snow leopards related to?
Yeah.
These
Are cougars and snow leopards related, Charlotte? And how many species are snow leopards related to in general?
So cougars and snow leopards are not related, but snow leopards are in the genus Panthera. And so there's 5 big cat species that are in that genus. And snow leopards are actually most related to tigers, which everyone is really surprised by. But genetically speaking, when you look at their DNA, they're more related to tigers than they are to anything else. So even common leopards, which you might see in Asia and Africa, and even sometimes overlapping in snow leopard now, they look a lot like snow leopard, just kind of a tan and black color as opposed to being white, brown, and tan. But they're not actually that closely related in terms of how related tigers and snow leopards are. So people are always kind of surprised that tigers are more like snow leopards than common leopards. But between the name and the way they look, it is a little surprising.
Awesome. All right, I lied about YouTube classes. Before we wrap up with Miss Sullivan's class, I wanted to ask one more for Miss Tremblay's class. I love when we get capascasing in Ontario, small towns in general. I love it. So the grade 1 student in their class, so Emma, wanted to ask, can snow leopards live very high in the mountains? So like you talked about 13,000, 15,000 feet, but the Himalaya get up to 29,000 feet. Have we seen snow leopards really up high?
We have, but not that high. I think the highest that one was recorded, let me think here now, 5,000, 6,000, maybe 18,000 feet at the most.
Yeah.
I think, don't quote me on that, but they're not living at the top of Mount Everest, that's for sure.
What a
Not
shock
that.
that would be, though, if you're like climbing Mount Everest, you get to the top, and there's just a leopard waiting for you. That'd be terrifying. Anyway, not much to eat. All right, great question, guys. And then, yeah, let's wrap it up. So, Miss Sullivan's class, if you guys want to end us off, come on up.
How many snow leopards have y'all seen?
Yeah. So,
How many
Charlotte,
have we seen?
Yeah.
So I have not seen one in person in the wild yet. I keep hoping that I will. But let's see here. With our camera traps, we've probably seen close to 50 different individuals across all of our field sites. And then with our genetics, so again, looking at the DNA in those scat poop samples, we have seen, that's what we mostly do. And we probably have seen close to 100 different individuals, different DNA genetic profiles. So I'm hoping I get to see a snow leopard in person soon. Every time I go, I get really excited that this might be the time, but I still haven't seen one yet.
Okay, maybe you should climb Mount Everest, see what happens.
Yeah, I'll be the one to discover it there.
That is very cool. Well, we wish you well. That's so exciting. How many, actually, before we wrap up, is there more chances in this field season for you to possibly see one? Are you going?
Oh,
out?
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
So I go back out in February next month. And then I go out every couple of months. So I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that I'll get lucky one day.
We will all keep our fingers crossed for you. So before I ask the question I always wrap up with, I wanted to highlight to our classes a couple things that they should do. And I'm going to pass along these links when we're done as well. But Planet Earth, about, I guess, 10, 15 years ago now, the original Planet Earth, did the best video ever done on snow leopards. Charlotte can attest to this, but it's the most spectacular footage you'll ever see. So I'll pass along that YouTube video when we're done. Do look up Snow Leopards BBC. And then for more on Charlotte herself, again, Reach the World tracks expeditions over the long term with stories, pictures, videos, and more. So I'll pass along Reach the World's website, but you can learn more about Charlotte and a whole bunch of other really, really amazing researchers. And I encourage you to do that if you're watching at home. So Charlotte, before we wrap up, is there any last other thing that you can suggest to classes where they can learn about snow leopards, about the work that you're doing, or get involved with the research that's being done in Tibet and China and all these amazing places?
Yeah, so there's actually a lot of great documentaries. You highlighted BBC, Planet Earth. That's some amazing footage. But if you have access to Netflix, there's a couple really, really amazing documentaries. There's Born in China, which is a really good one. And that actually has snow leopard footage from one of our field sites that we work in, a really popular field site that a lot of researchers are doing some really great, amazing work in. And then there's also one called Ghost of the Mountains, which is more about the research side of things and how we study snow leopards. So those are really cool ones to check out, or sit down with your parents or your family member, or friends. And so then you can kind of teach them things that you learned about snow leopards while you're watching it.
Outstanding. Well, thank you so much. Now, Charlotte, this is your first time ever joining us for one of these. So how this works is now I'm going to demute the microphones of every class. So boys and girls, if you guys get ready to join me in saying a huge thank you to Charlotte for joining us all the way from Beijing, you are now all demuted and you can go for it. Thank you so much. Awesome. Awesome, guys. So check for this on YouTube as well. Check for that link to all those additional resources. And thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Charlotte, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for being a part today.
No, thank you for having me. I had fun.
All right. Have a lovely rest of your day, everyone.